Hello folks, welcome back to the channel. Today, the preliminary report for the Novant AirLink accident in North Carolina was released. The original report that I did on this can be found in the description below, so feel free to check that out first before watching this update. But the preliminary report, it doesn't look good. Stick around and I'll provide an update. I'll be right back. So this was an accident with the operator being Apollo Medflight, providing services for hospital-based air ambulance service under the Novant hospital name with the brand name of AirLink, specifically AirLink 1. Now the aircraft was this 2006 EC-135 P2+ with Pratt & Whitney engines, and they were returning to base after dropping off a patient at New Hanover Regional Medical Center. Now their base was located at Albert Ellis Airport in Richlands, North Carolina, which is about 55 miles north of the hospital and probably about a 25 to 30-minute flight. Now, very important, the pilot was wearing his night vision goggles, otherwise known as NVGs, and they were heading northeast, flying at about 900 to 1,000 feet and somewhere around 120 to 125 knots, when the aircraft appeared to basically suddenly fall out of the sky based on the ADSB data. Now, the ADSB data then quickly disappears, and the helicopter then crashes into a heavily wooded and somewhat kind of marshy area. The pilot, the paramedic, and the nurse, they all survived, which is super awesome, but the paramedic and the pilot both suffered broken legs. It was dark, and they were wet, and they were muddy, and they did the right thing, and they stayed with the aircraft and were eventually found about an hour and a half later by some people out hunting raccoons and some state troopers. Now, there was not a problem with the weather, and birds did not appear to be a factor. So what happened? Well, one added benefit of having 3 survivors is that all 3 were able to give their account of what happened. All 3 accounts were pretty much the same. Now, in addition to the quotes from the NTSB preliminary report that was published today, I also have multiple sources with information that was not included in the preliminary report. So the following accounts are from both the NTSB preliminary report as well as these unnamed sources. Now, the pilot had just settled in for cruise flight on the way home. He had his NVGs on and had set his autopilot at 1,000 feet, which means he was now flying hands off when all of a sudden his NVGs or the mount that it was on that holds the NVGs fell off of his helmet. Now, these NVGs have sort of a safety rope that goes around the back of your neck so that if they do fall off the actual helmet, they don't hit the ground or worse, hit any controls, and they just kind of hang around your neck. Now, it can be a bit cumbersome to put night vision goggles back on to the mount of your helmet without being able to look at what it is that you're actually doing, especially if you're piloting the helicopter. So what did the pilot do? Well, he made the decision to stow the NVGs for the remainder of the flight. And he stated that he was comfortable doing so because the remainder of their flight was obstruction-free and that they would be landing at their home base, which was a fully lit airfield. Now, the bag or the little green case that holds the NVGs was hanging on the back of his seat. So he reached behind his seat and he grabbed the bag or the little case, and then he placed his NVGs and the NVG mount and the battery back into this NVG case. But just a moment later, the NVG case rolls off the left side of his lap. He tries to reach for the case, but as he does so, the helicopter pitched violently forward and started to rapidly descend. Now, the pilot did note while he was descending and attempting to regain control of the aircraft that at least one of the engines was overspeeding, which, as I have mentioned in a previous accident review on this channel with an EC-135, that this overspeeding, this could very well cause that engine to roll back to an idle. Yes, the EC-135s do have a FADEC system, which is, basically an automatic fuel control system where the pilots normally don't have to control anything with the fuel. It's all done by a computer. But on an EC-135, they are also sort of kind of a hybrid model, as they also have a manual throttle backup in case of a single or a dual FADEC failure, or in case of an overspeed detection that rolls one or both of the engines back to idle. Now, sometimes if one or both of the engines, if they do roll back to an idle, the pilot will have to manually adjust the throttle to get it back to full power. This is most likely the end cause of the Philadelphia crash that occurred a few years ago, where both engines rolled back due to somewhat similar circumstances. Now, in that case, the pilot did have time because he was flying at like 3,000 feet, but he never adjusted the throttles back to flight power, forcing him to try to land the aircraft with the engines basically at idle. Now, the difficulty in that Philadelphia crash was trying to pinpoint what exactly caused the helicopter to be upset in the first place and then roll and then lose altitude and overspeed the rotor system to the point that the engines also oversped, causing them to roll back to idle. I'm not sure we're ever going to know the answer to that case as to what upset that helicopter. But in this case with AirLink, we do know. And even though the pilot mentioned in his statement to the NTSB that the helicopter just violently pitched forward when reaching for the dropped NVG case, he was quoted by the flight nurse specifically as saying, "I dropped the NVG bag on the collective." Now, if that collective was in fact slammed all the way down, this is certainly what would have upset the helicopter and caused it to violently pitch forward. That's pretty obvious. But this also could have possibly caused the main rotors to overspeed, which would have unloaded the torque on one or more of the engines, which then in turn can cause one or both of those engines to overspeed themselves. And when these particular engines overspeed or are turning too fast, they kind of have two safety mechanisms. The first one is if they overspeed at like an incredibly high rate, they will actually purposely shed their turbine blades, which, while that will cause the engine to lose all power, obviously, will also prevent the engines from grenading and causing an explosion or a fire, which will obviously bring down the aircraft. But if the computer catches the overspeed in time, specifically around the 120% mark, then the FADEC system will instead roll that engine back to idle to keep it from being destroyed. But as I said, the pilot would then have to manually adjust the throttles, which are located on the collective, to get the power back. And if they do not do that, or if they don't do it in time, then they will continue to descend and ultimately crash or have a hard landing under little or no power, which is exactly what happened in the Philadelphia crash and very well may have happened here. I do want to note that this is not the first accident we have had like this in recent years. Lifeforce had a crash in an EC-135 where the pilot was distracted by his iPad. I already mentioned the Philadelphia crash, and then there was a Chinook crash that occurred back in 2022, which claimed the lives of both pilots, most likely due to a dropped iPad that got stuck in the foot pedals, causing them to lose control of the aircraft and kill everybody. Now, while each of these crashes do have an explanation and a probable cause, none of them are excusable. They shouldn't have happened. And it may also be worth noting that the pilot in this AirLink crash had a total of just 1,556 hours in a helicopter, which by most operators would be the absolute minimum required to get hired in the air ambulance industry. He also just had 24 hours in the EC-135. Now, it certainly sounds like this crash occurred due to task overload on the pilot, where something happened. In this case, the NVGs fell off of his head. He got stressed and moved too quickly to resolve the situation and just kept making things worse. The flight paramedic even offered to assist him, as the flight paramedic was sitting up front in the left seat, but his offer was declined. Now, we all make mistakes. Trust me, I make more mistakes than just about anybody, but we all make mistakes when we are new to a situation. We get stressed, then sometimes make poor decisions due to getting stuck in tunnel vision. I think that we should take this crash as another opportunity to update the approved training procedures for any helicopter operator, especially any air ambulance operator who flies the EC-135. So I've got two things that I want to recommend. Please, if you can do these things, it'd be great. I feel like it will save lives. First, as I recommended after the Philadelphia crash, practicing FADEC failures, including dual FADEC failures, dual FADEC failures due to engine overspeed should be a required approved training procedure in the simulator for EC-135s. This type of emergency happens so quickly and the situation deteriorates so quickly that it is absolutely should be practiced as an approved training procedure, because I do not think it is realistic to expect pilots to be able to react to such a volatile situation in such a short amount of time without any practice or simulation. Now, the second one, which should be a super easy one, we now know that NVGs falling off of a helmet can ultimately lead to that helicopter crashing. Let's practice it now. Simulate it. Simulate it on a check ride. Simulate it in the simulator. It doesn't matter how you do it, but now that we know that this can happen, let's spend 10 minutes practicing it so pilots are better prepared for it if and when the same thing happens to them. Either way, the best part of this story, everyone survived. The second best part, we now have 2 more great data points that we can use to make this industry safer if operators simply add the same scenarios that occurred here into their simulation and their training. I do thank everybody for taking the time to watch this. I hope that we can take at least 1 or 2 little pearls of wisdom away from this and apply it to where you work or to where you fly. Everybody fly safe, and we'll see you on the next episode.